turns out the plans to go to the International Place Branding Association conference have fallen through. My dog ate stuff he shouldn't have and was with the vets over the weekend, but he's fine now. But I've decided that traveling to France and leaving my wife behind and the dog, the situation was a bad decision. We were going to travel together and then make a holiday out of the trip, and then stay in France a bit longer. But we'll see if we can maybe make it to France in a week's time if Oreo, my dog, is better. So it sucks, but it's very interesting that when I had to make the decision of whether to go alone to the conference and read them back, I used what I had learned about decision making and how to try and formalize the problem and statements in between, being stuck between your goals, your ideal goals, and the constraints that you've got. And it really worked. And it's not the process, but it's stuff that I've been listening to lately from Russ Roberts. He's got a new book out. He's the Econ Talk podcast guy. Got a new book that talks about economics and the advances in behavioral economics that I'm interested in. And he was saying, he was using an example in the book, Charles Darwin's list of pros and cons of whether he should marry or not, and how any process like that can't help you imagine what a future is going to be like that you haven't experienced. But in the process of going through it, you can kind of get the feeling of how it's wrong, of what you really want. So it's like, I think he also used the example of like toss a coin just to see what you're hoping that you're going to get, right? So some of these might sound like trivialisms, but it's a way of making explicit what's implicit that you've already had as a decision that you've made. So I knew that my priority is to spend the time with my wife and dog. And the conference is always a great experience for me because it's a lot of people that we share interests with, but I'm just gonna have to skip it. But I don't want to miss out on the opportunity of making progress with the PhD, and it's always good to get feedback, when you present a bit more of a stressful situation. So I think what I'll do instead is I'll get a few reps of how I would have presented, because I've prepared a bit more extensively than the previous times, I think. I've got a lot of data. Previous year I had misunderstood the brief. It said you don't have to have a PowerPoint presentation. I was like, good, finally I can just talk about my PhD and free associate a bit. They meant like you didn't have to send it in advance. So I actually presented. I was lucky that day I had bumped into a bunch of design students in Barcelona, and they were doing a workshop it was about learning from experience. So I was like, that's tangentially close to what I'm interested in, so I'll talk to you about my PhD. And I had drawn a diagram that I used to do my presentation, and it was actually the first time I had considered how my findings apply to my own journey of choosing different places to live and how much of that was a choice. So I got great feedback. So this year it's not going to be that, but I've got my slides in front of me. I'm sitting next to a very beautiful scenic kind of bridge here in Bristol. Just been out for a quick run, and I think it's time to think about locational decisions under uncertainty, with a focus on the experiences of locational decisions, which is kind of my topic. Now, that's evolved over time, and what I would have shown is the different abstracts that I had submitted over the years of explaining the PhD. So I've actually, looked through past submissions, just see how it's evolved, because it's an iterative process with qualitative, interpretative research, where you kind of use a more of a applied perspective, where you try and carve out a statue out of a rock, and you can argue whether that's more the subjectivist approach. It is, but what you tend to find is probably similar to what others would if they weren't doing it, so it's a bit more subjective. But the context for my PhD project is that decisions have an experiential component. There's always a feeling and emotion and moods and gut feelings, heartfelt experiences, intuitions that go together with decisions. They do not generally get highlighted in the decision-making literature, because they prioritize a certain paradigm of methods that actually doesn't try to be accepting of the subjective approach, right? The sculpture making. They focus on more quantitative approaches, and that's something that's been already highlighted within their own field as a bit of a shortcoming. So there is a paper by Weiss and I think Shantu in last year, talking about how the judgment and decision making journal has sent them down a path that doesn't do enough to focus on decision making in the wild, and that kind of decision making is what I'm interested in. It's also what I think people that are in charge of policy making for places should be interested in, because oftentimes what they do is they kind of make the assumption that human capital should be attracted to cities. People with high degrees of human capital are going to drive GDP. So there is always this link between human capital, and normally it's a mix of the types of jobs they want, the talent, the types of education, and then my slides I would have shown a graph that in the budget of the UK government there was a link between what they call NVQ level, I think it was equivalence, how they do it. Yeah, someone that's above level 4, so higher education, and then the levels of gross value added. It's kind of a linear relationship. So, if just because I'm doing qualitative work doesn't mean I'm not going to take some numbers. At the aggregate, it probably is something to it, right? You need skills to drive your economy forward, but checking what the experience is on the ground can also be helpful about all the discussions about the shortcomings of that model and the types of ways in which we can create better models. So what I've done is that my kind of key aim with the PhD, and this has been stated and restated over the last 5 years, is to explore how locational decisions during certainty are experienced. Specifically, it looks at the experience of people with high degrees of human capital, and that's very much close to the work of Richard Florida, whose creative class work didn't just influence the science community, but resonated with people that were in charge of actually applying that in policy. So it's already had its critiques, even from himself, to focus on specific type of only groups, like there's a risk. But obviously within my research, the core aim can be broken down as well into goals that are, in summary, to review the place-related literature, to provide context for the decision-making experiences under investigation, reviewing the relevant behavioral economics literature to inform instruments for data collection, and then investigate the experiences of a sample of university students and staff in situations where they were choosing how to live. So you can see my operationalization of human capital here was someone that has not just in higher education, but obtained higher education and over, I only had like someone in the sample that was just graduating. Everybody else was masters, PhD, early career lecturers, and professors. So then I phenomenologically reduced the participants' experiences into themes that emerge from the data to develop a theoretical model of vocational decision making under uncertainty. I'll say that again. Phenomenologically reduce participants' experiences into themes that emerge from the data to develop a theoretical model of vocational decision-making under uncertainty, which could inform actions by those responsible for managing and marketing places. So, understanding the on-the-ground experience. So, when it comes to the theoretical framework, I presented that last year, and it's published as a book chapter. The key debate between Kahneman and Gigerenzer about what heuristics are. So heuristics are seen in the view of Kahneman, more traditional behavioral economics view, as mental shortcuts that are kind of the cause of bias, whereas Gigerenzer highlights the evolved adaptive nature of those heuristics that can be appropriate when there isn't a structured environment, but you're in an uncertain environment, what he calls a big world compared to a small world, where bias can't be determined quantitatively anyway. So I might as well take heuristics, and his heuristics are a bit different from the, his understanding, because it's qualitative. It's a bit different from just gut feelings. They're different from just biases, things that produce biases, but they're detailed descriptions of human behavior as it's experienced and formalized into rules of thumb. So this is where the distinction between the heuristic as the mental process and the rule of thumb is its verbalizable, communicatable aspects should be highlighted. And this is why in my instrument I ask people about different situations where they were choosing where to live, so that's the context. But ultimately it tried to capture their process of learning and how they made decisions as they went along the way, and then ask them about rules of thumb that they could teach others about choosing where to live. So that was a kind of the way of trying to elicit, get close at heuristics. It's not trying to assume that we can entirely get the full heuristic that way, but we can get people's views of how they work. So as part of the analysis, I did detailed reviews, pen portraits of each participant out of the 19 that in the end I interviewed, and I've captured into little journeys their education, work, birthplace, where they currently live, places they have family ties, places where they have friends. So these are kind of aspects relating to place and place attachment and place identity, and then also their experiences of living in different places, and then also kind of thinking if they would move, places they might be attracted to and places they would never consider living in. So all of this then was summarized into 4 key themes around place identity, place attachment. Sorry, not 4, 5. So place identity, place attachment, as in a model of decision making. In a way, those would be seen as constraints, whereas the approaches that you could take to making those decisions and the goal setting would be kind of your personal priorities. And then the process to get you there, whether that's rational, and what are the heuristics that you might use, or kind of the other themes. So it's kind of the themes, because I'm still analyzing, and their names are going to probably change a bit. I've called them place identity and place attachment, personal priorities, rationality, and intuition. And all of this will become a bit more detailed. So how do you then make sure that we know what we're talking about? And I was going to present how other similar concepts touch the ones that I'm interested in. when I'm talking about place identity, I'm not talking about just culture or being local or just what place marketing would portray as being the identity, or the place promotional stuff that you might see. When I talk about place attachment, I'm not talking about what place branding exactly might say is what you should love about your place. I'm not talking about just global, attachments to just certain types of aesthetics of places. I'm not talking about love. When I talk about personal priorities, it's very close. So you would see in some of my literature a nod to those things, but I'm not talking about consciousness or preferences or tastes, which is kind of the Bourdieu type of thing. I'm not talking about subjectivity exactly. I'm not talking about attitudes and values. It's priorities. Then when I'm talking about rationality, I'm not talking about judgments or actions or appraisals exactly. And in intuitions, I'm not talking about just emotions and moods and feelings. And then when you really boil it down, at the intersections of some of the themes, the core intersection between place identity and place attachment is what I broadly think is what Tuan in his 1990 work was referring to as topophilia, a sense of positive feeling towards a place with a desire to maintain closeness. This is also how the operationalization was done from the work of Hidalgo and Hernandez and my work. So like topophilia is a core thing, more abstract theme from the literature, and then between rationality and intuitions are the heuristics, because it depends in what situation you apply a heuristic, whether it's rational. So the idea is that making a decision in a certain way, whether that's deemed as rational, it depends on the context. So that's the model decision I would have shown, and how I considered other literature. But then when you go into, let me just moving my notes on the phone. Okay, then talking about the data. This time I'm going to start talking from the back to the front, so I don't do the usual where I over focus on place identity and attachment. So I'll start with intuition, because I think that's my ultimate contribution on heuristics. So the way that participants talked about intuition seemed that intuition is about a balance between rationality and emotion. So people talk about this balance in different ways. One participant talked about rationality and emotions. Let me just find that, because I've got the data here as well. So a direct quote is it's very difficult to zoom in and out on this board when you have so many objects. Not very mobile friendly mirror. Just give me a sec. So I'm gonna zoom in. So yeah, finding a balance between rationality and intuition. So I had someone capture that really well, and they were talking about I wanted to have a PhD, but I also care a lot about having a good experience here. So balancing the outcomes with the experience was seen as a goal. And also intuitions are about, when you think about heuristics specifically, if it's plausible and it makes sense, there may be others that are decisions that are shorter. The moments when we feel like heuristic is plausible may be experienced as a moment of kind of playfulness when we become aware of our surroundings. That was a mix between comments from a professor that was talking about, specifically why simple decisions appeal to us, because it's closer to our nature, but then also the experiences of a very intuitive participant who had mentioned in a few occasions kind of stepping out of the train station somewhere before thinking about whether they should go to university in Manchester, and was like, yep, I don't care what they offer, this is going to be it. And or also another moment when they were in the car at a traffic light, and they basically had just the decision, oh yeah, I need to go back home and look after my family. And I guess the way they explain that is that sometimes these intuitions come fully formed, the way that J.K. Rowling's, apparently she explained that Harry Potter came fully formed to her. So that was interesting. And zoom back out of the data. And so they're also about kind of having, it's fine to have your unorthodox views as intuitions. You have the right. Again, the participant mentioned that still don't own a house, because I don't think it's a good idea. Most people do it. Fine. Trying a decision on for size and patiently learning from your mistakes, and just again, that participant was very intuitive, mentioning how they would basically even consider going away to New Zealand, and then just like go through the steps of getting the visa and all that stuff. So I guess it's probably similar to, at least that process might give you what you really want, as I was talking earlier. Being patient is important because it takes time for ideas to gestate and to learn what your likes and dislikes are. So a participant talked about going to Japan and only then figuring out that's definitely not for me, and then coming back home to your anchors. And then it takes time. They mentioned like I'm older now, so it takes time for ideas to gestate. And then intuitions, yeah, they come as these moments of playfulness. I mentioned that already. Someone talked about taking the responsibility of the future direction while accepting that you're not entirely in control. And the approach was that you might take the reins for the next 5 years. This is where I want to head, but you're not in control exactly, how things are going to end up. So they had just taken up as a professor, a PhD, and kind of that approach. For the next 5 years, I want to commit to this direction, but not exactly sure where it's going to take me. And then learning to be patient and learning how to use your feelings to guide you, so that you can feel that you can get to know your priorities. That was a participant that was just doing a master's degree after taking time to travel abroad, and that was an experience where they realized they couldn't have known what the priorities are unless they tried something different. Intuitions are also about the ability to listen to your heart, so you can allow it can allow you to know where you can fit in. So it's not a head decision, but fitting. That's a combination between some of the discussions we had with people that were from Muslim background, finding it very difficult to fit in certain situations in everyday life, and at the same time knowing that it'll be much easier to live a life when they're surrounded by people that are from their own faith. But then they were stuck in, the fact that where they were in the West, they knew there was a bit better opportunity. So this is all the data around intuition, which I wanted to highlight for now, because that's what I missed off in the last recording. But it didn't make me think about intuition as like, how can I summarize it? There's so many things. I like to go back to theory. It's thinking about Herb Simon's definition of intuition is just purely recognition. So just recognizing, but what the hell are we recognizing when it comes to places? Are we just recognizing whether we're in a good mental state or whether we should change something? I guess that's it. So, are things working or are they not? Should I stay or should I go? If you're in those situations, I think some of the outputs that I might give is just go through these processes. I'll probably have to formalize them a bit more. So the moment they sound like wishy-washy statements, right? But people meant specific things you can do. That might be helpful. Okay.